I'm Cosentino from the college, and I want to welcome you all to the first of the New Year's programs. Happy New Year to all of you. We're in this smaller room so we can do a PowerPoint presentation from the folks at Cornell, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But a couple of quick notes. We want to thank our sponsors who have made this possible along with your memberships. Obviously, Tompkins Trust has been and I know you have a new name, and I will get to figure out the new name at some point. But we want to thank Tompkins Trust, who's been a very big supporter of this, as well as the Allen Family Foundation and the Fred L. Emerson Foundation, who've been supporting Wednesday Morning Roundtable for several years. So we'd like to thank them. We're going to deviate a little bit in the coming months from our normal programming, where we're looking at some trends. And so over the next 4 months, before we finish the year, for 21-22, we'll be looking at areas such as today, when we're talking about the census and demographic changes in our central New York area. But we'll be looking at the economy, looking at healthcare, and some other factors as we go in the Department of Labor. So we hope to bring those programs to you as well. One last introduction, she arrived just in time, is a new member, a new elected official for the City of Auburn, and that's Ginny Kent. So we'd like to welcome one of our members. She makes that entrance every day, by the way. For those that don't know, I see the entrance every morning. So with that, so without further ado, and I'm not going to make a long introduction, but I do want to tell you who's with us today is young Vink, who's an extension associate with Cornell. He's been there since 2008, where he came over from Holland, and he is with their Applied Demographics Programming Division. One of the reasons that we reached out, and this was thanks to Dan Fezzen of the Fred L. Emerson Foundation, was the idea that we wanted to look at some information to follow up on the programs we did 2 years ago about the census. And as you know right now, there's a lot of talk about the census because they're talking about redistricting. And that's the more political side of this, so we're not going to necessarily get into that, but look at things that are important to Central New York and our business community. The Cornell Program for Applied Demographics, or PAD, as he may refer to it, bridges a number of gaps that we have out there in the community to provide information not only to Cornell and Ithaca, but also to Central New York. For many of you who've used Extension, and I think there's at least 3 of you who've been on the board here locally, Extension is an important part of our community and providing information. So without further ado, because you don't want to listen to me, I'd like to introduce Mr. Vink, and he will be talking to you for the next 40 to 50 minutes, and then we'll do some Q&A. Welcome.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks for inviting me. Applied demography and census data, it became part of my blood, and I love talking about it. I'm sad that I only have 40 to 50 minutes. I wanted to give some highlight overview from what data is available, what does it show, kind of, I can only stick to some highlights today. And hopefully you go home and start looking at the census data yourself. So what I'm going to talk about mainly is about the census, which is a count of the population. You probably all filled out your forms last year, but I'm also going to talk about estimates and projections. Those are model-based. It's a big grinding machine with inputs, and output is annual estimates of population or projections into the future. And the third part is the American Community Survey, which is a sample out of the whole population. They just pick out random people. They have to are asked to fill out a long form and yeah, using the estimates, the control back to say something about the whole population. So starting with the census, the big purpose of the census, as it was written in 1780 or so, apportionment of the house seats and redistricting. But the census numbers are also used for a lot of other things, to distribute funding and planning, and to measure demographic change. The mission of the census is count everybody once, only once, and in the right place. Sounds simple, but over the years I've learned that it's a very, very complicated process. So, next one. Sorry. And the question is asked, how many people are there in each household? So each household got a questionnaire, how many people are there? And for every person in the household, the Census Bureau wanted to know the age, the sex, the race, Hispanic origin, and the relationships within the household. And of the house, they asked is this house owned or rented? And ideally, everybody receives one questionnaire, and you might have heard or be familiar that that's also not very simple. Local communities were asked to provide addresses, and not everybody fills it out, sends it back. That is not how it went. The Census Bureau was prepared that is not how it went. So people could answer without the questionnaire. They could call the Census Bureau in all kinds of different languages. Outreach helped to motivate people to respond. If people didn't respond, then field workers went out to ring the doorbell, and as you over, please respond, or I can fill out the form for you. If that didn't work, they went to the neighbors from Cato's about your neighbors, how many people live there. They also use some administrative data, especially from the postal service. If the post office now knew that the house was vacant for a long time, the Census Bureau said, we're going to visit that house one time, and if they also conclude it's vacant, then we don't visit that house again. So cutting costs. Unduplication, especially for students. Students might have been counted at a place where they studied, but they also might have been counted at their home address with their parents, and especially this year. So there's a lot of unduplication to get a person counted only once. And then finally, imputation. Not everybody fills out all the answers on a questionnaire. The Census Bureau fills in the gaps, and also sometimes for whole households. And, the product on April 26th, a little late, according to the law that should have been provided at the end of December, but because of COVID, everything was a little later. But on April 26th, the Census Bureau, or the President, announced the apportionment data. It included the state totals and how many seats in the House were available. Then August 12th, the redistricting data became available with contained information about voting age and race, Hispanic origin on a very low level of geography. And then people like me are waiting for the next release of demographic and housing characteristics. There is a lot more information about age and household type and gender and all the good stuff for demographers. That geographic detail is not as big as each census block, and there is a little bit of a balance between the detail, geographic detail, and the demographic detail. And then at one point, there also talk about a detailed DHC, which gives you information about detailed race. We'll tell a little bit more about that later. But for example, for a tribe or the Chinese population, or that's all in the detailed race tables. And family relations, of course, this year a lot of troubles generating the data, so they put that off for the later product. Starting with apportionment data. Yeah.
Yes.
On April 26th, the Census Bureau now just over 331 million residents in the US. The apportionment data includes, it's a little bit different than the resident population. Apportionment population has other people that reside in the States, but it also includes some overseas people that are attributed to a state. And the apportionment data does not include the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico. They are taking out for the apportionment calculations, as they don't have seats in the House. What does that mean for New York, the US? The resident population, those counted overseas, apportionment data. The US grew by just over 7% between 2010 and 2020. New York growth stayed behind, lagged a little bit behind, and we grew 4.2%. And yeah, because we didn't keep up, we lost a seat in the House. And you might remember at that time that about 435 seats, they are assigned one by one, and New York was eligible for the 436th seat. And if New York counted 89 people more, all else equal, we would have kept the 27th seat.
Wow.
So we were very close, very close. Or other ways of saying that Minnesota, who had that 45 seats, if they counted, I believe, 15 people less, the record would have been changed. Before going into detail about the redistricting data, I wanted to say a little bit about the census geography, about race, ethnicity, and diversity, and disclosure avoidance. Starting with geography, the Census Bureau, and the geography is just very complicated. But the Census Bureau, and everybody likes to divide things in smaller portions. The governmental units in New York, the state, the county, and the minor civil divisions, down the cities, and some of the American Indian reservations. Another hierarchy is state and villages, incorporated villages, state, the school district, the most school district boundaries in New York don't correspond with anything else. Then American Indian reservations is a very complicated geography on its own. And some are statistical, some are areas, some are reservations. The Seneca Nation is, for example, is a statistical area that crosses over into Cayuga County. So you can get statistics for that area. Then there are the legislative districts that's being worked on right now, the Congressional State Senate and State Assembly. That's from the redistricting. Just showing on a map what it looks like in Cayuga County. On the left, the towns in the city of Auburn, and on the right, all the places in Cayuga County. And there's a difference between the city, Auburn in this case, incorporated villages, blue, and there are also so-called census designated places where the county has input to say from here a lot of people, it's not incorporated, but we would like statistics on that community. And Cayuga County shows Melrose Park as one of those areas where statistics are available in that community. Then there are the statistical areas. splitting up all counties in a different way, with tracts, block groups, and block. There are population thresholds for tracts and block groups, which makes it a lot easier for statistical purposes to compare one with the other. Talk about the census designated places. Currently, public use microdata areas, areas where there is statistics available that you can make your own tabulations. We are in the process of making them right now. The next topic I wanted to address is the disclosure avoidance system. Title 13 explains what the census is for and who has what responsibility and all those kind of things. And one of the provisions is that the Census Bureau is not allowed to disclose or publish any private information that identifies an individual. With all those statistics available, I can imagine that become pretty hard to prevent disclosing private information. How do they try to avoid it with the disclosure avoidance system? And part of it is just not releasing all the data that you collect. The balance between demographic detail and geographic detail comes in there. But also releasing data that is slightly different but is counted. That is, they fudge the data a little bit. In the past, they did it by swapping. This household is very unique in that block. Let's swap that household with a household nearby. That household could not be identified anymore where they were counted. That worked pretty well, but on the other side, computers got a lot smarter, people get a lot smarter, and the Census Bureau determined that it was not enough, or we need to swap a lot of people. So they switched to a different system, a new technique that's based on differential privacy. The theory behind it is that every piece of data has a quantifiable amount of information, and just by adding some noise to that data, the risk of disclosure becomes a lot smaller. But the big question becomes then how much noise do we add? If you add too much noise, your data becomes inaccurate and unusable. But if you add too little noise, then you didn't take care of the problem you started with. So how does it work? The input is all the answers complete with the gaps filled in the census edited file. There's a very that file is behind big walls and nobody has access to it. They convert it to a histogram, and they start at the nation, how many males, how many females, how many under 18, how many over 18, those counts. And then they add a little bit of noise to that count. So if there were 100 males, then they add some noise, and it might say 105 males, and females the same. Then they do some probe processing because the number of males and females have to add up to the total. And the noise can also cause negative numbers. If there was only one person, you add some noise and get with -3.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm fascinated by this notion of noise. Noise essentially, like to a layman, it means fudging the data or changing the data.
Indeed.
Manipulating the data. Okay.
Yes.
Gotcha. And to a researcher like you, you're at the point where you accept it, or does it drive you bananas?
It drives me bananas. It drives me bananas. And we work a lot with the Census Bureau trying to make the data usable.
Sure.
And yeah, it has been a long process. It will be a long year this year just to pay attention to it.
Thank you.
So we start at the states, nation, and do the same for the states. But in the post-processing, they make sure that all the states add up to the nation, then to the counties, to the tracts, and then finally to the census blocks. Luckily, the Census Bureau produced some demonstration products where they showed what kind of effects that this closure-avoidance system had on the data. So we could learn from that. And what we see is that for small counts, areas with few people or unique populations, that fudging really has an impact on the data. Most of the error is random. It is kind of good that if you aggregate the data together, then the pluses and the minuses washes out and become more and more accurate. The emphasis is on most. Can you go back one? Also important to keep in mind that the households are manipulated separately from the population. I'll show some examples of that later, at least to small areas with impossible or very improbable counts. Get the next slide. Just as a demonstration, I took my own block. There are 4 houses in my block. I know my neighbors, so I could easily do the census of my own block on my own. 4 occupied houses. I counted 7 non-Hispanic white adults and 4 non-Hispanic white youth. Then the data came out, and in my case there were still 4 occupied houses, but that in a lot of blocks that is fudged as well. 4 non-Hispanic white adults, 6 non-Hispanic white youth, and 3 non-Hispanic Asian youth. That is in official data. So there's an example of that fudging, that instead of 11 people there are 30 people, and a lot more youth and even Asian youth in my block. But if you add it up with other blocks, then that all washes out. I stole this from colleagues in Maine. They did some analysis from what is usable data, and if you look at smaller populations, smaller geographies, they set a red light from don't draw conclusions only on this data. Next. So I talked about impossible and improbable blocks. Our areas, look at the blocks, there are about 250,000 blocks in New York, at least non-empty. There were 14,000 blocks that had a household population. So the Census Bureau said that there were people living there in houses, but there were no occupied houses. And that's because the fudging and the houses and the occupancy rate is done independent from the population. The other way around, there are also blocks with occupied houses but no population, or not enough population. There are blocks, 4,500 blocks, there on average there were more than 10 people in each house. We have it 53 times in 2010, so it's not impossible, but 53 times in 2010 and 4,500 times in 2020. There are also blocks where there's only people living there under 18. It happened 21 times in 2010 and almost 3,000 times in 2020. It can happen if there's only a juvenile institution in the block. So if you exclude those blocks, there was only 1 block left. but one house with one person, 15 or 16-year-old, I believe. And it's now almost 3,000, only youth. Yeah, the disclosure avoidance system is certainly something to keep in mind when you interpret the data, and especially if you go to very low level of geography. Next is race and ethnicity. This is the questionnaire, 2 questions, one of Hispanic origin and one where they ask about the race. And what was new in 2020 with the write-ins on white and black population. In all the previous censuses, you were just white or black and they didn't ask you any more information. But this time around, they asked for your origin. Where that came from, it's based on the standard on the race produced by the Office of Medicine and Budget in 1997. And they kind of defined, say, the white population of people that originate in Western Europe and a whole list of other countries. Black population, black is people that originate in Africa and a whole list of countries. So, that standard gives the Census Bureau information from, hey, if you wrote in that you're Canadian, then according to the OMB standard, you are white. And even if you said you were black Canadian, the standard said, yeah, you should be counted white. So the Census Bureau made that black and white. It's something to keep in mind. Leslie, can you go back one more? Leslie did a report recently describing all those changes and what that means. And our conclusion was this: if you look at the race data, don't compare race data between 2010 and 2020 because all those changes made. Yeah, it's very normal in the sense that the census in 1990, for example, we got only across one race. In 2000, people could cross out 2 or more races. It made it impossible to compare race data between 1990 and 2000. It's an ever-evolving process. The Census Bureau claims that this represents better what the population really is. Yeah. The race reporting, you have the Hispanic and non-Hispanic and all those race categories. And they are kind of making cross-tabulation of 14 fields. In most publications, you see the total of all the Hispanic population. So we don't look at the race of the Hispanic population. And the non-Hispanic population we divide by race. There's one classification you can make. I wanted to mention the other. Other is not defined in the OMB categories, but the Census Bureau, when they did some testing, said, yeah, people need that other category to get at least an answer. The change in the question and the new writing and also personal attitude, everything changed, and it led to some other race, 1.4 million to 2.2 million in New York, so from 7% of the population to 11%, and the 2 or more races, explained processing, went from almost 600,000 to almost 1.8 million. It's not because there are now much more 2 or more races. A lot of them has to do with the processing. That's why we kind of say, yeah, this would really make it bearable. Now, you now have the redistricting data, so we can look at the change in population, we can look at change in housing units, and we can look at the ethnicity, because that's all data that's now available. If we look at the population, I look at New York State, Cayuga County, and all the neighboring counties. State grew by 4.2%, but most of the counties in this area lost population between 2010 and 2020, with the exception of Onondaga and Tompkins County. If we go to a little bit finer scale, here's a map of all the towns and cities in the area. And the darkest orange lost more than 10% of the population over those 10 years, and the darkest purple gained more than 10%. So yeah, it's a bit of a quill. Yeah, I would say the southern part below Auburn, Cayuga County lost more population than the northern part. Yeah, next slide.
Another quick question, Jan. What is that area just north of Ithaca? Is that like Ovid or some such? I'm looking at the growth area. Yeah, there's no. I'm sorry. The purple, a couple blocks. Yeah.
My speculation, we see that throughout New York, is Amish communities.
Oh, I see. Okay, yeah.
The Amish communities grow a lot faster than the regular population. That would make guess.
Yeah, that makes
probably
sense.
A small town.
Small to begin with, so 10%.
Small to begin with, and yeah, a couple of Amish farmers move in there by the farms, then all of a sudden, a farm with only 2 people is now a farm with 10 people.
So it looks like the town of Ithaca is the only city that's shown growth.
Yes.
Like Rochester, no. Syracuse, no. Auburn.
Yeah, slight growth.
Slight growth.
Slight growth. Yes. And that's between 2000 and 2010. Certainly Syracuse and Rochester lost population, so
yeah.
At least the trend was different in those cities this time around. We can also look at over 18 and under 18, and this is the population under 18. Overall, the total population grew in New York State, but the population under age 18 declined with almost 5%. And if you look in this region, all the counties declined in population, and that's significant decline. So yeah, we see that back in schools, that the school enrollment goes down for quite a while now. This is a trend not likely to end anytime soon. Again, by town, the scale is a little bit bigger. We have to go to 30% change to display all the different cities and towns. And as you see, most have negative in some areas. And just outside Auburn, 20-30% loss in the youth population. Housing units is something else we pay attention to. New York State added almost 5% in housing stock. Most of the counties, the growth was pretty small. Again, exception, Tompkins County added a lot of housing. Onondaga did too. When I started looking at lower levels group, especially towns, and in this area it's not that strong. If you go over here in Allegheny County, for example, there are towns that lost 25% of the housing unit stock. And in the North Country too. That is something I hear that throughout the country. Hey, we didn't expect that when my housing unit lost. Census Bureau, tell us what happened here. And we don't know yet. Occupancy rate, we can also measure. That varies also. This is tracts instead of towns. Yeah, that measures differences within the city as well. So There are a lot of areas with more than 90% occupancy rate. But there are also areas, especially in southern Cayuga County, for example, where occupancy rate is lower. And yeah, at one point there will be also information from is it seasonal housing or are houses all for sale, and that, yeah, it's something we cannot tell from just looking at this. Diversity. We look at a table, those 40 fields, as what is the probability if you took two random people that fit in the same little cell. And it's called the diversity index. In New York State, if you took two random people, then there's 68% chance that they fall in different cells. In Cayuga County, the probability is a lot smaller. Diversity is little. You also see that under 18, those probabilities are higher than over 18, so the youth is more diverse. There are some footnotes to make with the diversity index. For example, the Asian population, not every Indian and Japanese people, yeah, OMB says that they are the same race. Do they feel like that themselves? Or somebody from Egypt and somebody from Sweden? Yeah, do they feel they're the same? That assumption is they fall in the same square, so that they have the same race. Again, if we look at the geographic detail track, the picture becomes a little bit more nuanced. There are large swaths where diversity at the moment is, two random people, probabilities of between 10 and 20%. In Cayuga County, there's one trait here that jumps out with a high diversity. Here kind of two. They happen to be the traits where there are lots of correctional facilities. Yeah, don't always look the same as the surrounding population. So what's next? We're waiting for more detailed data. We're also still waiting on more quality measures and things like overcount, undercount. Since we've just started analyzing the data they collected on that. And then I want to mention corrections. Local and state government can file cases of missing living quarters or there are errors in the group quarters. It's an important program and especially for the future. It's meant to make corrections that influence future use of the census. Not for the redistricting, not for the apportionment, but for future users from the program. As an example, Cosentino Cayuga Correctional Facility, where 690 inmates counted, where all those cell blocks are, but there are also 103 inmates counted in the field over here. In 2010, there were over 1,000 inmates counted in this field, and 0 over there. So that's something, if the town or anyone cared enough about it, they can file a case to the Census Bureau. In this case, probably doesn't matter for anybody if you count it there or there. But throughout New York, there are examples where it does matter. Next, estimates and projections. Most people use a cohort component method, but there's a tail. It says that if you take the population at a certain time and you add the births, subtract the death, add the people moving in, subtract the people moving out, then you get the population at the next year. It's a pretty simple formula, and the next assumption is that everybody gets a year older in a year. last year, I'm not sure, but go back one slide. It's important to make a distinction between the estimates and projections. The estimates, they estimate all those components based on other data available, administrative data, and in projections, we make assumptions on those components. And that enables us to look into the future. The Census Bureau produces annual estimates, county level, and all those components have changed. They estimate by age, sex, race, and Hispanic origin, the sub-counties, the total population, and the start population is normally the census, and all those corrections, the towns and the towns going are part of that base. So that's where the future application comes from. Only this year, because not all the data is available, they had to come up with a new base. We had a program on Applied Demographics produce projections. Last time we did that was in 2018. We do our projections by sex and by age. And in 2018 we make projections starting in 2015 out to 2040. We hope to pick this back up soon after the census data becomes available. Go out to 2050, start with state projections and assumption on the state level, and then build up from that to go to new county projections next spring. What does it look like for New York State? Blue was the trends between 2000 and 2010. The solid orange line was the estimated population in New York State, the trend between 2010 and 2020. The census came out a lot higher than the estimate, about 4.3% higher. That's across the census count, and the dashed orange line is an adjusted line, but the trend could have been between 2010 and 2020. The little green line is hard to see, but the estimates that were released a couple of months ago, because of COVID and all that, it's estimated that since that in 2021, the population of New York dropped below the 20 million again. A pretty big drop. The county estimate is not available yet. The yellow line is our projection starting in 2015. We hit the mark in 2020 pretty well, and then the future. Cayuga County has been declining in population over the last 2 decades, and our projections kind of continue that trend. You can look at different components of change. For Cayuga County, this is the birth and deaths, very close to each other. Around 2010, 2000, there were still more births and deaths, but in most recent years, it's reversed and there are more deaths than births. That's this blue line. Domestic migration is the big driver in a lot of counties, and it's negative for Cayuga County, meaning more people moving out than moving in. Varies a little bit year by year, but that's the big driver of the change in the population. You can also look at age. It's a little bit hard to read. The blue line is the 2000, 2010, and 2020 according to the census. You see, especially at the younger ages, that there are fewer people at every census. But if you go in the higher ages, those bars get longer in the most recent census. There are more people of older ages. Something to keep in mind. Think about services. This is for 2020. I used our projection because we don't have the data from the census yet. Make a community survey. big survey, about 2 million households annually. Also a lot of reporters, things like prisons, dorms, and those. They ask you a lot of things about demographics, from where did you come from, where were you born, all those kind of questions, economic, what's your income, what's your occupation, where do you work, where do you work, how long does it take you to work, social, from what language do you talk, speak at home, a lot of questions, housing, so weighted back to the population estimates that's used as the control, reported annually for areas 65 and over, and 5-year ACS for the smaller, for the towns, for the trades. In 2020, you only have an experimental data because of very low response rate, and they had to stop the collection of data for a couple of months. They had too much problems, and we cannot get the same quality as normal. Some examples: poverty status. You can learn about the poverty status, number of people below the poverty line and the poverty rate, different ages, but the table goes on and on, also by race and all those kind of things. I also wanted to mention the margin of error. That is important if you use the ACS. What is it? It's something to create a confidence, so-called confidence interval. The estimate of the middle value minus the margin of error, and estimate plus the minus of error, that interval is established so that the probability that the real value is between those two is 90%. So it can get pretty wide. Example of poverty rate in the county. Sorry, can you go back? The confidence interval is 12.7 to 17.5. Can be usable for some areas. Sometimes that gets too wide, and it's better to use the 5-year ACS. There's a sample size that is a lot larger, and it gets a smaller margin of error. But it's data collected over 5 years, so it's not as current. Some other examples. Type of computer, internet subscription. I'm going to rush through the slides a little bit. You can make a chart over time, the confidence interval around the median household income. And then there are a lot of other things the census process. Just wanted to mention a couple, the Pulse survey. They did a lot of COVID-related stuff, and were able to get a new questionnaire out, a new survey out of the door very quickly, very useful. Things just to keep in mind, I wanted to mention, I hope if you look back, I can help you for the slides if you're interested. Don't go look out for it. Next slide. This is an example of vulnerable population for the COVID. Highlighted some stuff. Yeah, it is a nice, for each county, nice picture of the population. There's a large part of the census bureau that worked on graphics, but there is almost just as large part that worked on economic products. Economic census every 5 years is the big driver there. But they also produce county business patterns. They have a very nice census business builder. You get information about the population and other businesses in a local area. And they have a linkage between employers and employees, where they live, where they work. And they have a nice mapping application on the map. This is from the Pulse survey. Asked everybody from, we have more people working now than before the COVID. And so you can get that information. This is for New York State. You don't get it a smaller geography. This is an example from work in a residence as this application. People that work or that live in the city of Auburn, where do they work? These are the top 10 towns and cities where the people that live in Auburn, where they work. Most of them work in Auburn themselves, about 1/3, but the other 2/3 work in surrounding towns. A couple of resources and my email address from our program. Please feel free to contact me if you have any questions or if you want a slide. So yeah, we are there for you.
Well, thank you. So we want to open it up for the next couple of minutes for Q&A, and let me ask you just a basic question. How accurate do you think the census was in 2020?
This is just a
Do you want us to turn the video off for that? Forgetting the noise issue.
There were a lot of problems, and we see those problems. We hear about the problems. It's very hard. It varies a lot. The college students is one of the bigger examples where they really had problems collecting the data because everybody was sent away from the colleges before April 1st. So they had very nice plans to collect that data, but yeah, they kind of had to throw it all out. They asked the universities and colleges to provide a lot of the data, and some colleges and universities did, others did not. Yeah, that causes varying problems. Before the census, there was a lot of talk of including a citizenship question and producing tables on illegal immigrants. Might have had an impact of some minority communities in responding. Yeah. How are they going to use the data? There might have been some hesitance. You'll learn about that later. In general, I think so far what we've seen looks pretty useful.
When I filled out the census, I think it was whatever it was a couple of years ago, I think they said you're one of a sample that's going to fill out the long one, and it was really, really long. Is that like just a few percentage points, like 10% of the population, or they try to get as many people as possible? And my second part of that question is, I kept getting notices in the mail, fill out your census, and like, can't they at least acknowledge that I did it? And I just worry about the accuracy from those two perspectives. So
You were lucky enough to get an American Community Survey. I've got it myself. Yeah, about 2 million households a year get that survey. They were hoping to get, when they started the program, to get something like 5% of the population spread over 5 years. Then I've heard that other forums as well that the normal response follow-up that is technical is not perfect. They try to keep track from this person has answered the census and we don't have to bother again. But like all government systems, more or less, there are errors in it. It's not perfect. And they hear those complaints and try to be better at it. Yeah.
Question? Jessica, go ahead.
There was one of the slides that had Melrose Park, and it was like an area where there was undeterminable data. data or something? I wasn't sure
And,
what that meant.
the county told the Census Bureau from this area, Melrose Park, we want separate statistics for that area. It's not a governmental unit. The Cayuga County found it important enough that they asked the Census Bureau to include that in the areas to produce statistics for.
What is
That's
it?
right at the
Is
bottom.
this,
Emerson
it's,
Park.
okay, it is Emerson Park, okay.
Wasco.
'Cause okay, we just don't
Is it
know it as
included Wasco
Melrose
as well?
Park.
Good.
So it didn't.
The county
Yeah,
gave it
I'm
the
like,
name.
what
huh?
is that?
It shows up on maps.
Huh.
Probably,
A lot of times
yeah.
if you're on your
Melrose
cell
Park.
phone, it tells you you're
Oh,
located in
really?
Melrose Park, yeah.
It's Melrose Road and then the building.
Yeah.
Farms.
Okay.
I don't know about there.
Yeah, Jan, did you say that there's more employment since COVID? There was one part near the end, I'm not sure if I even heard you correctly.
So they asked, I'm not sure about who is employable and not. It's mostly small businesses. Do you have more employees now or less employees than before COVID? And the picture showed the distribution of the answers. A lot of them I had about equal, and there were some that now have more employees, and a little bit more, I think, that now have less employees.
I see.
It's a statistic that is produced, now, I believe every other week or every month, so you can track that over time. From does it catch up, does it or not in New York State? I haven't done those analysis, but you can do those analysis with the data.
Okay, thank you.
On NPR the other day, they had something about the number of DBAs that have been filed. Does somehow that count in employment? So if DBAs are way up high in the last 2 years during COVID, does that count as employment for people?
I'm sorry. I don't know.
Let me ask you two short questions, but they may be long answers. So the first one is, you showed a lot of youth trends, especially in Cayuga County, where that population, the 3 bars going across, and we have a decline in young people. So for those who fund schools, those who fund things of that nature and programs for youth, do you see that as a long-term trend? And I don't know how much data, I know you said you're still getting data. How much have you sliced and diced those 18 and under into segments? Because we keep hearing this, is that the number of young people will come back. There will be an echo at some point. But we've been hearing that for 2 decades now.
Yeah, and it kind of started with the baby boom. With the baby boom generation, with a real peak. When they started getting kids when they were in the 2030s, they got another dip in the number of births, but a little lower. I think we are now in the second generation of that, and hope, but yeah, it doesn't really pan out. Last couple of years, you see that everywhere, that especially people in their 20s get less and less, choose to have less and less children. And these uncertain times certainly don't help in 2008 with the Great Recession. A lot of people held off on getting children. I imagine here in the Gulf period as well, that the number of births is a lot lower. But if that rebounds, has to be seen.
So, I don't know if you're a surfer of all this data, but over the last year, what's your big takeaway for Central New York? Or what worries you trend-wise?
Now the aging of the population is certainly something that worries me for a lot of rural communities. And the baby boom generation over the last 10 years already started retiring, and that will continue for a while. And yeah, is there somebody to replace them? The small shops in the smaller towns, yeah, are they able to survive? Maybe the dollar store seem to replace a lot of that, but yeah. I remember an article was in the North Country. Who's gonna ride the ambulances around? Those are real questions, and especially with an aging population, you need that care. The need for care gets bigger, but the population that wouldn't be able to provide it gets smaller. Yeah, that's one of the trends that worries.
So that may not be a problem necessarily in Ithaca or Tompkins. Were you surprised at Syracuse having an uptick?
A little bit, yes. Yes. There's a little bit in New York City as well, and Rochester, Buffalo. The estimates all kind of saw a decline in population for those counties, for Erie, Onondaga, Monroe, and also for the New York City boroughs. And then the census came out, and all those counties added a population. Yes, I was surprised.
So there was some great information here. We want to thank you on behalf of the Wednesday Morning Roundtable for joining us and providing this information. I know we will be online. I know that I would love to see slide 48 again. Like my dad with a clicker, which was about Cayuga County. But we want to thank our friend Cornell. And again, if you have not used cooperative extension and extension services, which is much broader than just what's on Grand Ave or the college, Cornell does a wonderful job. So thank you. So just some finishing notes. We'll be back February 16th with a program on economics and the markets, not the stock market itself, but on trends there. We have plans for programs on veterans and also on healthcare. So again, I want to thank Tompkins Trust, major sponsor of this event, Wegmans, as well as the Fred L. Emerson Foundation and the Allen Family Foundation. Be safe out there. It's supposed to get warmer, they say. So, thank you and travel safely. Thank you.